Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Congressional Staffer Breakout Room. My name is Jamie. I'm just going to say a few quick housekeeping. Everyone is muted and will stay muted except for our speakers. If you have a question you would like to ask one of the panelists or the panelist, please open the chat and message the person whose name is Ask Me Panelists. If you have general questions about CCL, you can message the person named Ask Me CCL Questions. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the incredible Ben Pendergrass and Adeline DeYoung.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We are joined by Sarah Hansen, Senior Legislative Assistant from Representative Charlie Crist's office. And we're just going to have a casual conversation. We might be being joined by another staffer who's a little bit later getting on, so we'll be looking for him. And I'm just going to start it off and start asking you some questions. Sarah, does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds great to me. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Well, we really appreciate it. And we know COVID has changed a lot of how all of us work right now. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's changed specifically for you and how you and your boss are working during the time of COVID on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change obviously is moving everything to virtual. So the Hill is run by relationships and personal interactions and a lot of soft skills. And so moving into this world of not being able to take face-to-face meetings, not having in-person committee hearings or even in-person voting to a certain extent, has certainly changed the way you develop relationships on the Hill, the way you hold meetings, the kind of day-to-day where you would just pop in and out of your boss's office. Now you have to set up calls for, Zoom calls and virtual conferences. It's just a completely different vibe and honestly a little bit of a different skill set from face-to-face interactions. And I spend a lot more time on the computer now.
Yeah, I think we're all getting a little Zoom fatigue these days.
Yeah.
With basically like three competing crises all happening at once. Plus the difficulty we are having working from home and working remotely. Do you feel like it's been pretty much all hands on deck just to respond to those crises, or do you find there's room to still have conversations around other policy areas?
So I think it's a little of both. When everything first started happening, particularly back in March and April, it was a little bit of a triage situation where it was all hands on deck answering constituent calls, constituent concerns related to the CARES Act, related to stimulus payments, unemployment, that kind of stuff. And pretty much everything else was put on hold for a while. And now that we have started kind of getting out of the worst of that and the immediate follow-up from the CARES Act, folks are seeming to get a little bit back into their regular issue areas, digging into some other things, but there are still just moments when something might come up where you have to set aside, an environmental bill you're working on to, help with a constituent who hasn't gotten their payment yet or something along those lines. So it's almost a little bit of a whiplash situation sometimes where you're excited to get back to normal work, but then, something happens, it pulls you back into all coronavirus all the time. But it's thankfully, I think it's starting to move into, as people are getting used to the situations they're in, and as we are coming to terms with the fact that this is going to be our home for a while, working remotely, we're slowly starting to ease back into more regular order and normal business and normal policy issues.
I think that's real helpful perspective, because I think it's a brave new world for everybody, including our volunteers, and we're all trying to navigate this to the best of our ability. So we really appreciate that insight.
Yeah.
So what, especially with all the information overload and virtual meetings, what is really the most relevant and helpful information that CCL volunteers could provide to staff in their meetings next week?
I honestly think because everything is so focused on coronavirus, is kind of hearing how that has changed your lives and how and tying that into kind of the environmental aspect, I think, is helpful too in that discussion when we're talking about things like air quality, when we're talking about environmental justice and impacts on lower income communities. I think it's important to, in the Hill, we're all very focused on coronavirus, and so I think any conversations you have, it's important to tie in how the environment and the health of our planet can alleviate or worsen the impacts of coronavirus, particularly on public health.
Thank you. Well, this kind of goes to a follow-up to that with our lobbying meetings. I mean, you've now been doing this, having these virtual meetings as staff for a while and living in this world. What have you found has made for the most productive virtual meetings? And what really just doesn't work when you're not in the same room?
So honestly, this is gonna sound kind of strange. So the most productive virtual meetings, kind of going back to the first question, where I said a lot of work on the Hill is soft skills and relationship building, but because these virtual meetings tend to take more time, honestly, and a little bit more energy, just kind of getting to the point is always helpful. So, going in, being respectful of folks' time, and, just saying what you came there to say, obviously, like, be polite and ask how folks are doing and all. But yeah, I've just found the virtual calls, one could say this is certainly a drawback of them. It's a less personal experience, and it is hard to have to jump from one call to another every day. So the more efficient, the better.
I hope everybody's listening to that. Because I think I see about 500 volunteers on this line, so I hope they take that to heart in their meetings next week. And this next one might be a little bit of a fraught question, put you on the spot here. What are the least helpful things that NGOs and trade associations and other big groups in DC, what do you feel like is the least helpful thing they're doing right now for you to perform your job? If you could give us some insight on that, that'd be great.
I think, let's think of good ways to say this. I think keeping stuff relevant to the times and keeping stuff relevant to the office you're speaking with is impactful. And so sometimes if I am hearing from folks and I don't know what the heck the tie-in is or why they're talking to me or why my boss should care, it's frustrating from a time management perspective. And so anything you can do to really tie in your conversations with that office in particular and with some of the stuff, as I mentioned, like coronavirus and, how the environment can make the impacts better or worse, I think is very helpful. And to try to stay away from, things that are, I don't want to say lower priority, because the environment is absolutely 100% critical. It's everything. We have to live on this planet. But just given how Hill staff are pulled in so many directions these days, that kind of taking it back a notch, keeping it relevant, is helpful.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So kind of sticking with the theme of how we're all operating the COVID crisis, what, as staff, what has really surprised you the most about working during the current crisis?
How unprepared Congress was for remote work. Yeah, in all honesty, we are, as I mentioned at the beginning, an institution that values these face-to-face conversations, and there will be tons of us packed into one room for committee hearings or members on the floor for votes. And we had, we meaning Congress as a whole, had never really thought about how to move beyond that into the 21st century, or what we might have to do differently if we were going to have to work remotely for whatever reason. And so just the time and the energy it took to get up to speed technologically, as we saw, we were only just now getting into remote voting and remote committee hearings. That was, how ill-equipped Congress was for this type of stuff was surprising. I think folks have been adapting very well, though. We're starting to. My boss had his first virtual hearing yesterday. It went really well. And so it's showing that Congress can adapt when they need to, and maybe teaching us some valuable lessons in the future about how to be more flexible.
Something that Congress is really known for.
Yeah.
Well, I'll ask one more question before I turn over to Adeline to take some questions from the audience, and just to remind everybody, we do want to stay away from policy. We don't want to get into deep dives into any particular policy questions, or just kind of how best to work with Congress is the kind of theme of this. And so along those lines, how can we and our volunteers make your life easier?
Honestly, you guys are super easy already. I like working with y'all. You're low time management, low demands, and I think that's really, especially in this day and age, that's really it right now. Congressional staff are all over the place, and everything's a little bit on fire at all times. So keeping it kind of low maintenance with staffers, keeping it to the point, being respectful of time, like absolutely is the way to go about, and would be helpful to myself, and I'm sure everyone else who you all are planning to meet with.
Well, thanks a lot, Sarah. I really appreciate your insights into those things. Adeline, do we have a couple questions we can make sure they're easy ones?
Oh yeah, we've got questions pouring in. So Sarah, first off, I'll ask, how is the House conducting votes and holding committee meetings right now? Who's actually in DC?
Yeah, so we're essentially all remote at this point. For as far as I'm aware, that all the committee stuff is happening remotely or will happen remotely. Voting on the floor on bills at this point is being done, can be done in person or via proxy. It really depends on the members, how comfortable they are traveling, what their schedules might look like. And I mean, there's still a good number of folks who are coming to DC to sit in the committee rooms, even though they're all being done virtual. There are still a good number of members who are flying up for voting. It just kind of depends on the day and the week and what people have going on.
Awesome, thanks. Another question we've gotten a few times, a lot of our volunteers will call the DC office phone number to reach their member of Congress or staffer. Is that being forwarded right now? Who do those calls go to if no one's on the Hill?
So I can't speak to every office because we are all our little silos and we all have different ways we're doing it. In our office, we are rolling our DC phone into our district office. So our district staffers are answering all the phone calls and then doling them out from there. Honestly, I would suggest if you need to call an office, call the district office. That's just my understanding, is that most of the district folks, because they do the constituent casework, they're getting the heavy phone volume now. So most offices are rolling down there.
Gotcha. That's super helpful to know for all of our volunteers. So thank you. We've got, are there any advantages to Zoom meetings or over in-person meetings that our volunteers should know about?
I could wear yoga pants. That's definitely that's a bonus. Yeah, I mean, I think Zoom meetings, in-person meetings, I will always prefer personally, and I think kind of provide the best opportunity for building a relationship. But when that's not possible, I think Zoom meetings and video meetings are more beneficial than phone calls. It's nice to be able to see a person's face, to get some sort of idea of their body language, how they're reading what you're saying. And so I think when we're talking about if you should have a phone call or a Zoom meeting, I would say Zoom meeting is certainly more helpful just from a more personal kind of level.
Got it. Awesome. We've also had a few people asking questions sort of around the lines of, if constituents are definitely planning on bringing up a specific bill, should they send you information on that beforehand, or do you think staffers prefer to kind of learn about it in the meeting and not have to do homework before?
So I like to know what I am going to be talking about in meetings. So you can send me information on the bill, or you can just let me know that these kind of broad issues are what you want to cover. I find that helpful. That way I can come into the meeting as prepared as I can be to answer your questions or discuss the issues. With congressional staffers, we handle so many things at one time that there really is no way for us to like ever know what is 100% happening on the Hill and other offices. You know, we sometimes don't know about every single bill that has been introduced. So having a heads up, at least from my perspective, is helpful for me to provide you back with more information during the meeting.
Got it. And related to that, on not really knowing like what else is going on in other offices, we've gotten a few questions that, you know, normally it seems like members can approach each other on the floor and staffers will see each other in the hallway. How do you find that offices, are they communing with each other a lot less now? Are people specifically reaching out, or how are you seeing that being handled?
Yeah, at this point, most of the interaction between members and staff is 100% professional. You know, you send them an email or you call them when you need something work related, which is what I kind of alluded to with feeling like some of the soft skills are going by the wayside here, you know, because when we're on the Hill, I staff my boss in a committee hearing and I see all the other staffers who are there and can, you know, chat with them in the antechamber and say hi. And it goes a little bit beyond just talking about, will you co-sponsor my boss's bill? And so I think that's definitely been a big change, and one that, you know, makes me personally a little sad. I like seeing all my congressional staff friends, and I know my boss probably feels the same way with not being able to see all the other members every day. So it's certainly less like friendly is the wrong word, because we all, you know, we're all still friendly with each other, but now it's just kind of strictly work stuff when we need it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a bummer. And I'm finding that too. Normally I'm in an office with Ben and we get to talk about New Mexico and hassle each other. And now we can't.
I know. I miss all my, not just staffers in other offices. I miss all my coworkers and our office itself. It's a huge change.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, another question that we're getting here, and we just get all the time, and I'm sure it varies by office, but what do you find most useful when constituents are reaching out to your office? Does your office prefer phone calls or emails or filling out the contact form on your webpage? What's best there?
It kind of depends, and that's actually my for our legislative correspondent, since he sorts through all the phone calls and stuff. Based on conversations I've had with him, though, he tends to prefer the form or the email contact, because it's easier for him we use a system to sort all of our incoming constituent correspondence. And when it is electronic, it's much easier to just put it in that system instead of having to transcribe a phone call and enter it in. So I think, and then also we will have people's email addresses and we can respond electronically as well, which is environmentally friendly compared to mailing out paper letters. So I think this day and age, at least in our office, we definitely prefer the electronic communication.
Got it. That makes sense. So we have a question here do you have any tips on give to citizens for how they can best interact with actual members of Congress?
So if you're looking for a meeting with the member, my suggestion is and again, every office is different. In our office, emailing the scheduler is the most efficient, because you can email me, but then I'm going to loop in the scheduler and then it's an extra step. And so emailing the scheduler and having constituents from that member's district in the meeting really helps. You know, if you're just coming in and you're saying to our office, oh, we have some people from Florida, but they're from, you know, over here, because, you know, the members are so busy, they will often pass the meetings on to staff if it's not a constituent in there. So if you can get someone from that member's district, that goes a long way to like getting member time.
Got it. And I think this is one of the few instances where it is helpful that we're having these virtual meetings, is normally it's hard to get someone from every district to fly out to DC for our lobby day. So hopefully we'll be able to get some more actual constituents in those meetings this next week. Another question, well, we've gotten a few just about you. One, I think what some people might have joined on late, what office you work for, but also how did you get to the position you are today in your office?
Yeah, so I work for Congressman Charlie Crist from Florida. He represents the St. Pete Clearwater area. The question about how to get a job on the Hill, there is one answer that is correct, but it always feels like I wish I could give people more. It's relationships, in all honesty. There are a lot of smart people that want to work for members of Congress. And so taking the time to build relationships really goes a long way. I got my job in my boss's current office because I, knew the right people at the right time, essentially. So definitely, like, if you're interested in getting a job on the Hill, get coffee with people, have conversations, build relationships, and then, know how to use those relationships at the right time.
Great. That's really useful information. I think that probably holds true to most jobs as well. So
yes. Yeah. I know it always feels a little bit like a cop out. Oh, you just have to know the right person.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've gotten a few on like what is really important to staffers and members of Congress. I'll start with one. How much do staffers look at local media? So a lot of CCLers write LTEs and op-eds for their local newspaper. Is that something that staffers are really paying attention to?
Yes. Yeah. We all have logins for local newspapers in our boss's district. The press staff, they spend a lot more time in that world, but they will see literally everything. And if they think it's relevant to, for us legislative staffers, if they think it's relevant to our issue areas, they will share it with us. So I'm always looking at Tampa Bay Times and those types of newspapers. So yeah, 100%. I see stuff that you guys will write with op-eds. So yes.
I'm glad we haven't been wasting our time for the past 10 years.
Yes, I am reading them.
Great. All right. So what types of support in the district is really important to members of Congress? Is that like chambers of commerce, really constituent support, local businesses? Like what do you guys really look for?
All the above, honestly. We in our office, and I'm sure this is true across the Hill, we like to have strong relationships with everyone, with our local and state elected officials, with the chambers of commerce, with local businesses, with, industries that play a huge role, like travel and tourism in my boss's district. That's definitely the bread and butter of the district staff is there. They are there not only for constituent support and casework, but to build those local relationships so that there is a pipeline of information that can flow from all levels of government.
Got it. All right. So kind of shifting more to having to approach meetings with different types of offices. So if a constituent has a meeting with a staffer whose boss, whether this person specifically, their senator is retiring, do you have any tips on how to approach a meeting with a retiring member of Congress?
That's a good question. I haven't worked for anyone that was retiring. I think, members who are retiring to a certain extent have felt like they've accomplished kind of what they've come to DC to do. And so I think, and this probably holds true across all offices, I think just making sure they know that it's important to their district. And even though they're retiring, they're still the member. They still obviously care about their constituents. So making sure that they know the issue is still important to constituents, and tying it back to the district is always going to resonate much better than anything else.
Great. That's really useful. And I know a lot of times we've sort of told our volunteers that just because that member is retiring, that doesn't mean that staffer is going away. So do you think would you appreciate if your member is retiring, if, volunteers meeting with you were asking what your job plans were, or do you think that's a little too personal?
Yeah, that's always a touchy one when you're working for a member that is retiring or potentially who lost their primary election or some, basically they know that they're gone after this cycle for whatever reason. It's tough on staff, because, that means, all right, we're jobless when you find a new job. I think it sort of depends on the staffer. You can feel them out. You can kind of see, especially if it's an in-person meeting, which I know we don't have now, but a video conference, if it's a touchy subject for them, if they seem a little stressed about it, some of them might have big plans for their future and others might be more upset or broken up over it.
Got it. That totally makes sense. Another one that I feel like can be a little touchy is that a lot of our volunteers have asked questions about if I'm meeting with an office that's the opposite party, Like, how do I approach that? Do they just not even want to be meeting with me? What's the best way to meet with a member of Congress who is a Republican or Democrat and you're the opposite?
So that's always a hard one, because I know obviously you as activists will have strong opinions, and then that office as staff and as the member will have strong opinions. I mean, it goes back again to the district. Is this district one that is going to be impacted more severely by climate change in the shorter term? You know, you look at a lot like Florida offices, for instance, Florida Republicans, always tying it back to the district, you know, being polite, not, you know, you can offer them the facts, but don't, you know, try to argue with them or anything. Yeah, I mean, climate is becoming a much more bipartisan issue over the last several years, which is exciting, and I think is very important in terms of moving forward on it. So yeah, I mean, I run into staff. I deal with Republican staff on a daily basis, and you just kind of craft your talking points and your arguments for them. You can frame it as an economic issue if, you know, like in Florida, if the district is going to be harmed by climate change and it might impact tourism. Just always kind of like tie it back to what that member would be most interested in.
Great. That is really useful for our volunteers to have that specific information, because I think it happens a lot. So speaking of, you talked about bipartisan a lot in there. We've gotten a lot of questions on bipartisanship. So first off, are there any issues, whether that, you know, climate or anything, that you feel like are more bipartisan and easier to work on for everyone, Republicans and Democrats together?
Yes. I mean, there are certainly some issues that everyone likes much more than others. You know, if we're sticking in kind of the environmental sphere and working for a member from Florida, you know, offshore drilling is a huge bipartisan issue for Florida. You know, all of the Florida Republicans oppose drilling off state. You know, addressing things like harmful algal blooms in Florida, largely bipartisan because it impacts the whole state. On a national scale, in terms of climate stuff, I mean, resiliency is definitely gaining steam as a bipartisan issue. You know, my boss has a bill related to flood mitigation that he's worked on with Congressman Roger Williams from Texas. And yeah, I mean, and as we see the impacts of climate change kind of gain steam, you know, it's moving. More and more members on both sides of the aisle are willing to have that conversation and approach the issue.
Adeline, I think we have time for just one more question. Make it a good one.
All right. We'll stick it with bipartisanship since CCL loves that so much. Sarah, have you really, I know these are such tough times for everyone. Have you seen anything in, you know, these past few months that really gives you hope on moving forward in bipartisan ways, whether that's climate or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense amongst staff, at least, and I'm sure members to a certain extent, of, you know, kind of being in the trenches together on these crises we're seeing. And that has forced a lot of negotiation because we knew we needed relief packages and we knew we needed stimulus packages. And it's in those moments where, despite the infighting, you realize that, you know, people really do want to do what's right and get stuff done and, you know, support constituents in this country as much as they can. And so I think even though we're all separated on some level, it was a good reminder of the ability of folks to work together and that, you know, we are kind of all in this together and, you know, in the trenches together.
Great. And that's a perfect spot to end it, Ben.
I think so. Thank you so much, Adeline. Sarah, I just want to thank you for the time today and shouldering the burden of all these questions. And of course, we deeply appreciate all the work you do. We deeply appreciate the work your boss does. He's been a great champion of CCL and a great partner and a great advocate of action on climate. And we hope to continue to work with both of you going forward in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, We are creating the political will for a livable world.